Greetings. I'm Shannon Stoney, and I'm your professor for this course, Art 1035. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of explain some of the requirements for this course and how it's going to work online, because obviously the whole class is online. Normally it's a lecture class. I'm trying to make this online class as much like the lecture class as possible. So for that reason, there are lectures that I'm recording in Zoom, um, and then uploading a link to the lecture for you to have access to whenever you need it. But you can also attend the Zoom session when I record the lecture, which is going to be from 11 to 11:50 on Mondays and Wednesdays. So all of that information I put in the online content of your class. Let me just share my screen here so you can see. Okay, let's see. All right. Okay, so this is the front page of your course online. Um, and I have an announcement here that tells what time the lectures are going to be. In addition to the lectures, there's also, and then I'm going to record the lecture, upload a link to it to the site here. So if you can't make the actual lecture time from 11 to 11:50 on Mondays and Wednesdays, you can nevertheless look at it. And then there's going to be discussion periods about the lecture and the reading from 11 to 11:30 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Those also are optional, but you get 5 points extra on your daily grade if you attend the discussion period. So what is the daily grade? The daily grade is something that we started doing about a year ago at Fall State, instead of checking attendance. So in the lecture, in the in-person class, the daily grade was based on two things: a little quiz at the end of the class and a question that each student wrote and brought to class, a discussion question that we used during the discussion period in the class. So after you view the lecture here online, you're required to write a discussion question about some topic that was in the lecture. So this is just one, at a minimum, one sentence, a question sentence. And it should be not a factual question, but a question that prompts discussion. That is an open-ended question. And I have a handout about what makes a good question, and I'm going to put that in the content as well for you. But basically, it's a question that there's not an answer to. So one answer to. So this is something that's difficult for a lot of students initially, because they're accustomed to school being about questions that have one answer. But in the humanities, a lot of the interesting and important questions are not just factual questions, like how long did it take him to make that painting? That's not a discussion question, because there's just one answer. I mean, how would we discuss that? A better discussion question would be something like, why do you think Picasso used red in this so prevalently in this painting, or something like that? But we'll go over that some more over the next few days. So, and this week, the first week, there's no discussion period, just the lectures. But in week 2 is when you have to begin submitting your questions about the lecture. And so we have time to talk about that some more before you have to actually do it. And you submit those questions to the Dropbox. So Also, each chapter that we cover has at least one quiz over that chapter that's in under the evaluation tab, which I'm going to show you right now. So here's the quizzes. Okay, there is a quiz. There's something called a pretest, and that's not for a grade. It's just for departmental research. The art department in Gallatin uses these tests, the pretest and the post-test, to see if you learned anything in the class, but it's anonymous and it doesn't count towards your grade. The first quiz that really counts is the Chapter 1 quiz, and it's not due until September 4th because it takes some people a while to get their text. Now, one question that comes up a lot about the text is, do you need the text? Because apparently some people are in the habit of not buying the text for their class. And the truth is, yes, you do need your text. Buy your text. It's not optional. You can buy a used copy of your text. It's not a good idea to buy an older edition. You need the 11th edition of Preble's art forms, as we'll see when we go over the syllabus. But you do need your text because the quizzes follow closely the content in the text. The lectures are kind of about the text, but there's also other information presented in the lectures that's not in the text. So you need to plan on reading the text and attending the lectures virtually, watching the lecture, in order to do the quizzes. Okay, so back to the front page of your course here and the announcements. Okay, so in this paragraph, 2 paragraphs, it explains about the Zoom lectures and the Zoom discussion questions. Now, once you start submitting discussion questions to the Dropbox, I will choose from those discussion questions and we'll talk about some of them during the discussion period. And again, if you attend the discussion and you participate in the discussion, you get extra points on your daily grade. Okay. Where is the syllabus? I'm going to show you. So it's under the content. This explains well, this is a link to the pre-quiz. Okay, so the syllabus, oops, it's not there. Okay, I haven't uploaded it yet, but let me just go to it on my hard drive here. The syllabus gives you the exact information about the text. The text is very good text. I think it's really worth buying. Okay, so here's my email address, shannonstoney@ballstate.edu. Oh, it's the 12th edition of Preble's art forms. That's the one you want. Sometimes it comes with a digital version also. You don't need that has some little tests and things in it, but you don't need the little tests in that digital version. And really, I think you'll have an easier time doing the quizzes if you have a hard copy of the book, so that you don't have to toggle between windows of your text, digital text, and the online course. Okay, so I'm going to talk in a minute about what the course is about, the course objectives, and what Art 1035 is actually about. But for a minute, let's just talk about the grading. So the biggest part of your grade is what's called the exhibition essay. And what that means is you are required to visit an art exhibit. And at this point, it's not clear whether it's going to be, it has to be an in-person art exhibit or it can be an online one. Um, I haven't decided about that because I'm not sure exactly what museums are going to be open because of the pandemic. I know the Frisk Center is open in Nashville, and usually the Tennessee Tech Gallery has an art show that's usually really good, and I assume that they're going to be open also. And when I find out, I'll let you know. Last spring, since that gallery was closed, people visited an exhibit online and wrote about an exhibit online. So that may happen again this semester. We'll see. Okay, so that's 33% of your grade, and I'll give you a lot more information about that assignment as we get closer to it. Then 33% is tests. 11% is are the online quizzes, but I only take, I think, well, I think it's all but 3 of your online quiz grades are averaged. 3 of them are dropped. And then, so if you miss a couple of quizzes, it's not a huge deal. Then there's a midterm and a final exam, and those are usually in class, but obviously they'll have to be online this time. And then 34% is participation, and that's your daily grade. But I only take the top 10 of your participation grades, of your daily grade, to get your participation grade. So if you miss a few days for some reason, don't worry about it because it's just your top 10 daily grades. Okay, so attendance, obviously, this is supposed to be an asynchronous class, so you can watch the lectures whenever you want. You can attend the discussions if you want to. Let's get rid of this. Okay. All right. So, and then this tells a little bit about the exhibition essay, but we'll go over more of that later. Okay, so the classroom environment, that's kind of moot for now, but plan to pay attention if you're going to come to the discussion and the lecture. Don't turn off your video and audio and go take a nap or something. All right. So I'm going to talk some more about exactly what this class is about in a minute, but you can sort of see an outline of it here. Okay, so any other things? All right, so down here on this page, it talks about plagiarism. Plagiarism has been an ongoing problem in this class from the beginning. I think people just don't believe that I'm going to notice when you plagiarize. So what is plagiarism? Plagiarism is where you cut and paste a string of words from somebody else's writing into your own writing. So like, let's say you're working on the exhibition essay, which is the only really big piece of writing. Of course, you'll have to do some writing for the midterm test and the final exam. Those are both essay tests. So what people sometimes do is they think they can go to a website, find some information about the question, and then just cut and paste a sentence from that web page into their essay, and they think I won't notice, but I do notice. It's not because I memorized the internet, it's because I can tell when your style changes from your voice to somebody else's voice, some art historian's voice or something. So just don't do it. If you have any questions about how to avoid it, it's not that hard. You just paraphrase information that you find elsewhere or quote it directly. You can quote somebody else's words, but say where they came from and acknowledge that they're somebody else's words, not your own. It's pretty easy to avoid plagiarism. But again, if you're not sure, ask me or another teacher. Okay, so let's scroll back up here to where it says material and processes. Now this probably won't be as big a problem online as it is in person, but inevitably, this has happened a lot over the last few semesters. People are in this class for a week or two, and suddenly they discover that it involves uh, nude human bodies, and they kind of freak out. So don't be surprised if you see some nudity, okay? It's just part of visual art and has been from the beginning. The very first chapter has some nudity in your text. Maybe that wasn't okay when you were in high school, but it's perfectly okay now in college. Wait, why is this not? I don't understand. Okay. All right. So, uh, also, especially contemporary art gets into a lot of sort of social issues that, as I wrote here, visual art often raises issues that are sensitive, graphic, or controversial. It's normal to feel upset or offended sometimes when viewing certain kinds of visual art. When you see something that offends you, even if you hate it, try to engage with it and think about its context, content, and formal properties. So we'll go over what those things are after a while. But again, just try to roll with it. Okay. Let me start my timer again. All right. So now the schedule is something you need to know about. Okay. So this is the schedule of readings. That means this date over here on the left is when there will be a lecture about that chapter. And you can also see when the midterm is, when the exhibition essay is due, and so on. So normally in college, you're expected to come to the lecture prepared. That is, you're supposed to do the reading that the lecture is going to be about before you go to the lecture. So I understand that in the first couple of weeks that may not be possible because maybe you don't have your text yet. So don't freak out. Look at the lecture anyway. But eventually your goal should be to have done the reading about that chapter and that topic before you watch the lecture, because the lecture expands on the text. It may go over some of the things in the text, but in some cases, like when we get to ancient Greece, it goes way beyond the text. And so the text is necessary, but not sufficient. You need to also need to read the text, come to the lecture having read the text, and then the lecture amplifies what was in the text. Okay, so now hopefully I'll have a little time to actually go over chapter 1. I used a lot of time to just go over some of the logistics of the class, and I'll explain more of that later. Okay, so now I'm going to show you the PowerPoint. Okay, here's PowerPoint. All right. Okay, so I usually start with this painting because students are kind of amazed by it. I mean, it's a piece of what we could call contemporary art because it was made in the 80s. That's not that long ago. Unfortunately, Basquiat, who made it, is dead, but he died at a very young age, at age 29. Okay, and I like to show this painting because it sold for $100 million. And the reason I like to talk about that is just to show you that art is big business. It's not irrelevant. I mean, I know a lot of people think, why do I have to take this course? This is stupid. But you know, art is important. Art has its own economy that's huge, and it can be emotionally really powerful, as I think this painting is. This is a big painting made by a young man, a young Haitian American guy in the 80s who was sort of a painting rock star and went from being a graffiti artist to being a painter, a fine artist in a very short time, made a ton of money, and then died of a drug overdose, sadly, kind of like Kurt Cobain or something. He was a lot like Kurt Cobain, sort of, again, kind of a rock star artist. And so we'll talk about Basquiat more in the future, but this is him. He's an interesting guy, a tragic figure in a lot of ways. Okay, so this course is about visual art. That when we talk about the arts, we obviously include music, dance, theater, film, all those things. But this course is about visual art. But let's just think about the word art for a minute. A lot of cultures in the ancient world didn't really have a word for art. That is, painting, sculpture, things like that. They just had a word for well made or well executed. The Greek's term was techne, sort of, which is related to our word for technology, meaning just the ability to make things well. So artists were not special, they were just kind of a type of craftsperson, you could say. And really, in our world, there's two kinds, well, I mean, it's sort of an oversimplification, but there's sort of two kinds of artists, according to your text anyway: trained artists and untrained artists. So a trained artist is somebody who's been to art school and got a degree in something about visual art. For example, Dale Chihuly, who's from Seattle, he has a degree in sculpture from two universities, RISD and another one. Anyway, he's a glass artist, and these are gigantic. His specialty is making huge pieces of glass that you wouldn't think would be possible to blow by hand. But these are like 3 feet in diameter. These are giant things in his gallery in Seattle. This is from an exhibit that he had at a park in North Carolina, Biltmore Estate. He's got a show right now at Cheekwood, which is one of the things you could visit for your exhibition essay. That would be an awesome thing to do. And I saw this exhibit in Seattle when I went out there to visit some people. I went to the Chihuly show place and saw all these sculptures, glass sculptures. Okay, but what's an untrained artist? So an untrained artist is a person who has not been to art school, basically, but they've kind of taught themselves. They're sometimes called self-taught artists. And I think this guy, Simon Rodia, is mentioned in your book. Anyway, he created these amazing steel towers, structures that are in Los Angeles now. Well, he built them in Los Angeles, and he developed a special kind of concrete, and he inlaid them with all these designs, and they're structurally sound, amazingly. Nobody really knows how he did that. He didn't model them ahead of time with computers, but as he built them, he just managed to make them sound enough that they've stood up all this time, and you can still visit them. It's safe. You probably shouldn't climb on them, but they're safe to look at. And around here, there was a similar kind of structure made by untrained, self-taught, sometimes called visionary artists even. And that was Horace Burgess's treehouse, which burned about a year ago. But it was, you may have seen it before it burned. It was an amazing structure. A lot of these self-taught artists are sometimes called visionary artists because they claim to be on a mission from God, like the Blues Brothers. And Horace Burgess was one of those people. He made this treehouse because he said God told him that if he started that God would help him finish it. And it really was an incredible thing. I got to go up in it before it was closed. It was closed for being a fire hazard, which it turned out it was. So again, at Cheekwood in Nashville, there's a collection of works by William Edmondson, who was a folk artist, they don't like to be called that, a self-taught artist in Nashville. So that there's a whole room full of these sculptures by William Edmondson. He was kind of discovered by some New Yorkers in the 1930s, and sort of vaulted to fame as a stone sculptor. So rural Southerners are sort of specialists in this type of so-called outsider art. And this is a work by a rural Southerner named Lonnie Holley. And it was in a show last year, and I just love this thing. It's, it's clear that it's supposed to be a motorcycle, but obviously it's a motorcycle that you could never ride, made out of all kinds of weird little parts that Lonnie Holley has in his collection. Wood, looks like bits of horn and cloth. Let me see if it has in my notes what it's made out of. No. Anyway, he calls it riding through my roots too fast, which is kind of funny. I just got the joke. It's almost like he was riding through the woods and he sort of uprooted some roots, his roots, and that stuck to that became the handlebars, kind of. Yeah, so this stuff made out of junk is sort of a specialty of rural Southern artists. A lot of times African American, but sometimes white people too. Okay, so let's talk about a concept. Let me see how much time I've got left here. Okay, well, we'll just keep going. If I don't get to everything, that's okay. This is, what we're going to talk about now is representation versus abstraction. Okay, so representation is pretty straightforward. It means when you're trying to draw or paint something and make it look like it really does in real life. So I think anybody looking at this would recognize that the artist 17,000 years ago wanted to make a picture that looked like a bull. I mean, it may be an ancient bull, an auroch, but you can, if you've ever seen a cow even, much less a bull, you kind of recognize what this is, because it's a representational example of representational art. It's not exactly like a bull. I mean, his legs are a little too thin maybe, and I don't know about these horns, exactly how he's got them sort of situated, but it's a bull, we know that. But abstraction, a lot of times you can't tell what it started out as. Okay, so I'm going to take you through a series of images of the transformation of a representational drawing to an abstraction. Okay, so here's a representational drawing, again, of a cow or a bull by Theo van Doesburg. And then he kind of simplifies it to some basic shapes here, and then assigns colors to those shapes. And at this point, the bull has disappeared and it's just a collection of shapes. So if somebody asked you if that was a bull, you'd probably say no. It's an abstraction. You might know that it's an abstraction of a bull, but it's not a representational drawing anymore. And this is an example from my own work of a kind of abstraction that I think I called the night garden or something like that. So you can see that there's some shapes that kind of look like leaves, and a shape that could be a butterfly or a moth, and a moon, but there's more than one moon, and then some kind of flower-like shape. But it's not a representational painting of a garden. There's also art that never starts out as anything in the real world, but just starts with some shapes or patterns. And sometimes that's called non-representational. That is, it's not an abstraction of something real. It's just not, it was never representational. And these go back a long way too. This is really old. This is from, 5,000 years ago. And it's a tomb with a big rock with these spiral patterns on it that the ancient Irish culture was very fond of. It was on their jewelry also. I guess you could say, oh, it's an abstraction of water or a seashell or something like that. Maybe. So in the 20th century, Jackson Pollock is sort of the pioneer of non-representational art. That is art that doesn't start out as being about something and then becomes more and more abstract. For him, you didn't have to start with quote unquote nature. You just started with lines of different colors, basically. Um, and the lines sort of become shapes, and that's what his paintings consisted of. And we'll get to Pollock later and have more to say about him later. He's a very interesting figure in this sort of question about abstraction. So, a lot of, you've probably seen or made abstract art yourself. If you've made a tie-dye t-shirt, or if you've ever made a quilt, or if somebody you know has made a quilt. The quilt is not usually about something. It's not a picture of something, unless it's Sunbonnet Soup, maybe. Usually it's just a design, right? It's just a collection of shapes and colors and that are put together in a conscious way that's a design. And that's a form of abstraction too. So it's not a weird idea. It's something that everybody has experienced. Okay, so when we talk about visual art, we sometimes talk about something called the form. So the form is the sum of all the elements that go together to make up the work of art. The lines, the shapes, the masses, the lighting. And we're going to go over each of those elements separately in a later lecture. But right now we're just going to talk about the form versus the content. So in this case, it may, unless you look down at the bottom and saw that this was called pepper number 30, when you looked at it, you might think, what the heck is that? It looks sort of like a person, but not really. So the formal decisions that Edward Weston, the photographer, it's a photograph of a pepper. The formal decisions that he made were all about, they weren't about making a photograph of something that was the most representational pepper he could find, obviously. He was going for a pleasing, interesting sort of combination of light and dark shapes and lines and masses in two dimensions. It's a purely formal photograph. That is, it's not really about peppers, green peppers. It's about the elements of art. So, but sometimes in visual art, usually there's more of a sort of tension between what we call the form and the content. So in your book, they have this example of form and content. Okay, so ostensibly on the surface, these two sculptures are about the same thing because they're both called The Kiss. And in fact, Rodin, the sculptor who made the sculpture on your left, was a teacher of Brancusi, the sculptor on the right. And there's no doubt that Brancusi was aware of the Rodin sculpture. They were both living in Paris and working in Paris. Rodin was a lot older than Brancusi. So they're both about a kiss, but obviously the form that each of these sculptures took is very different. The Rodin sculpture is very representational, even naturalistic. That is, he went to a lot of trouble to make sure the anatomy of the people was realistic. Um, he understands anatomy very well. You can see he studied the musculature of the human body, and he can make a sculpture of two people kissing, sitting on a very uncomfortable looking rock. And he can make it look pretty convincing. I mean, it's not in color; it's white marble, but other than that, it's very realistic. Brancusi, on the other hand, was not interested in that. Obviously, his sculpture calls to mind almost the block of marble, the the six sides of the block of marble that he bought more than it does the idea of a kiss, right? He's sort of calling attention to the fact that this is made out of a block of marble that I bought that had four sides, a top and a bottom, and I've just sort of drawn on the surface of this block some lines with my chisel to indicate, there's this couple and they're kissing, but they don't. It's almost like a kid's, or somebody said once it looked like minions kissing. And they're it's weird. Their eyes are wide open and they're like fused into one eye. Their lips are like little cartoon people lips that are fused. Maybe this is the girl because she's got a boob kind of and longer hair. Although one student, when we were looking at this, took the rubber band out of his hair and said, "Look, my hair goes down to my waist too." I was like, okay, maybe that's a man boob. I don't know. Anyway, it's obviously very, very different forms for the same content. And the important thing is the form that the artist chose affects the content. Now, because they chose different forms, the content is not really the same, right? I mean, this kiss is like a spontaneous romantic kiss. A lot of people have said that this kiss looks like "Now you may kiss the bride," or people who have been married a long time. It's not as passionate a kiss because it just looks kind of formal or something. So the point is that the form that you choose for your work of art affects the content. Okay, now everybody who has lived in America or in Europe for any period of time recognizes that this is a picture of Jesus. Maybe it's a particularly buff and kind of sexy Jesus, but you recognize that this is Jesus because of the crown of thorns, the fish, his hairstyle, maybe his beard or whatever. That is all Jesus iconography. So that's sort of a $5 word that's in your text if you don't know how to spell it. There's no whiteboard here, so I can't write it for you. But iconography is usually associated with religious paintings, but not always. Those are the clues that tell you things. If you're a Christian, you know Christian iconography. If you see a stable with a baby and animals and Mary and Joseph, you know that's a nativity scene. That's Jesus being born on Christmas Day. Similarly, you recognize the crown of thorns, the fisher of men, all of Jesus's iconography. And again, the halo, the book. This is from a Greek Orthodox icon. And that's where the word iconography comes from. It comes from the word icon, which is a religious painting of God or Jesus, rarely Mary, but sometimes. So, yeah. But if you saw this is also a religious work of art, but if you're not a Buddhist, you may not understand the iconography of a work of art that's not from your religion or your culture. This is a Buddha. It's Amida Buddha, sometimes called Amitabha Buddha, and he's sitting on what's called the lotus throne, which is a big flower, and his hand is in a particular gesture called a mudra, and he has a sort of a top knot on his head that I used to think was a man bun, but it's not. It's a swelling on the top of your head that you get when you're enlightened. Apparently your fontanelle sort of goes bloop like that, and your brain kind of bursts out. I don't know. But when you become enlightened, allegedly, you have like a little bump on the top of your head. And Buddhists often have very long earlobes too, because he was a prince before he became a monk, and he had really heavy earrings. So you would know all this if you had grown up in a Buddhist society. So if you haven't, though, you have to learn iconography, and that's part of what we do in art history. Sometimes iconography is very personal. It doesn't have to be religious. So this painting by Frida Kahlo, a self-portrait, is full of objects that relate to her own biography, her own personal life. She painted this after she broke up with her husband, Diego Rivera. And some of the iconography has to do with these animals. I think he gave her this monkey. And for her, the monkey sort of had an evil meaning. And the hummingbird is an Aztec symbol of resurrection. This is a dead hummingbird. But she's also appropriated Christian iconography, this sort of crown of thorns thing, but she's wearing it around her neck. And apparently these butterflies are symbols of regeneration, dragonflies and butterflies. So you have to kind of learn things like that in order to appreciate a work of art like this. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the main screen here. Okay, so that's all for today. And on Wednesday, there'll be a lecture over Chapter 2. And then the following Monday, there'll be a lecture over Chapter 3. And on that day, that's the first day that you need to write a discussion question about the lecture. So you might want to go into the content and read the little handout about how to write a good discussion question. And we'll talk more about the content on Wednesday. I'll show you some more things in the content, but feel free to explore the content in the meantime. And if you have a question, just email me. Bye.